Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by the Dude Ranchers Association and Golden Wings Horseshoes and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. Today, we're taking you to the movies. Alan Rohde is here to talk about Western film noir, specifically the seminal film Blood on the Moon, starring Robert Mitchum and the focus of Alan's new book. So pop some corn, grab a drink, and settle in.
Well, Alan, good morning.
Another pretty day here in the desert. We get a lot of those.
All right.
It's
Well,
kind of...
I have to tell you, thanks for having me on. And it's actually was in the 30s here in Los Angeles. So I think some of the cold is creeping into the West Coast.
Well, I'll tell you, it's there's an inch of ice on our water troughs in the back corral, and I'm not adapted to cold, so my fingers all froze up and my attitude got worse and grumpier than usual. But anyway, we're a lot warmer than a lot of places. My friend in Calgary told me it was 37 below at his ranch this morning. So
Rather be in Tucson. Oh boy.
I can't even imagine that. If it gets down to the 40s here in the San Fernando Valley, I start looking at the winter coats.
Yeah, me too. So we've got Alan Day, of course, always co-host, and Alan Rohde. And Alan Rohde is he's somebody who can recommend great movies to queue up. He's a charter director and treasurer of the Film Noir Foundation. He's hosted film festivals, classic cinema events, appeared in documentaries about classic films, interviewed some of the golden age of Hollywood celebrities. He's written 2 cinema biographies, one about the actor Charles McGraw, the other about director Michael Curtiz, whose directing credits include Casablanca, that gets everybody's attention, I imagine, Mildred Pierce, Yankee Doodle Dandy, and Alan's new book is Blood on the Moon, and it's about the 1948 Western noir starring Robert Mitchum. And it's great to have you, Alan, from Los Angeles in 30-degree weather.
It is great to be with you guys, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, it sounds like we kind of enjoy dealing with people from the movies, and you're right in the middle of that, so we're happy to have you on. It sounds like you've been interested in the movie industry for a lot of years. When did you start with that?
Well, I had it in my DNA. Although I was born and raised in New Jersey, and you can hear a little of that talk with water in my voice, although I've lost most of the New Jersey accent. My mother and her family came from Hollywood, and so I grew up in an environment. She was a kid actor in some of the early R gangs, and
Did something?
That's are you there?
No, I don't hear.
We dropped the call. Stan, we're going to get Alan back on here, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah, I think I always had the movie industry in my DNA. My mother was born in Hollywood over 100 years ago, and she was involved in the business on the periphery. My grandfather was a musical director at Universal, and my grandmother, for a time in the 20s, had a radio show here in Hollywood. So I grew up with the movie DNA and the talk about the movies and actors and actresses and Carole Lombard's potty mouth and Bela Lugosi's drug habit and all of this movie gossip and watching movies on TV when there were only like 5 or 6 channels in that era. So after a long, circuitous route through the Navy and industry and everything, here in Los Angeles over 20 years ago, and started getting involved in writing books and doing voiceover commentaries and involved in the Film Noir Foundation. So I think as far as the movies go, I grew up with it, and I always had it in me.
Well, you definitely have that voice for voiceover. Can we define noir film?
Well, film noir, like beauty, is often in the eye of the beholder. That name came about after World War II. There was a French critic named Nino Frank, and there hadn't been any American films over in France due to the war. And after the war, they started looking at films and seeing films like Double Indemnity and Laura and The Woman in the Window. And this critic labeled them as film noir, dark films. And they were different than the classic 1930s gangsters, good guys and the bad guys. And film noir, in my view, grew out of an organic movement. And by organic, I mean elements of something that were not necessarily intended fitting together. You had hard-boiled detective stories that became popular, such as Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, that started being adopted for movies. You had a number of immigrant directors and photographers that came over from Europe, running away from the Nazis, that used a lot of evolutionary photography, what they call Churrasco photography of darkened faces, angles, constrainment, and so forth. And you see a lot of that in Blood on the Moon. The director of photography for Blood on the Moon was a fellow by the name of Nick Musarasca, who was Italian and came to Hollywood and started out as a driver for J. Stewart Blackstone, one of the very early silent film producers. And so all of that. And the other thing I think that brought it about was really World War II and how that changed everything, changed the reality of what women were doing and what men were doing, and that things became much more ambiguous. And I think film noirs are recognized by a specific type of tropes or plots, normally a 20th century urban setting, often at night, gloomy interiors, characters who are morally ambiguous, either unhappy, dissatisfied, unattained, marching to the beat of their own drummer. A lot of times from the war, you would have a movie start with somebody showing up at Union Station in Los Angeles, having amnesia and trying to figure out who they are. There's a friend of mine who labeled amnesia as was film noir's version of the common cold, which I thought was very clever. Any humor in a film noir is usually cynical, wry, or corrosive. A defiance of the law and existing social mores by the protagonist, fatalism, and again, the low-key, dark-shaded shadow lighting, corrupt or indifferent law enforcement characters, anti-heroic characters, and very often a femme fatale who is contrasted with a loyal female character in the film. And, these are just some of these attributes. And my friend, the late mystery writer Arthur Lyons, when asked what is film noir, once famously said, well, you can tell it's a film noir if the lead character gets screwed over in the first 5 minutes of the movie and it goes downhill from there.
Well, it's a term obviously that I've heard before. It's clearly out there, but that was a really clear definition of something that's not probably that clear. So that was perfect. What's the general storyline of the Western noir Blood on the Moon that's the subject of your book? What's sort of the basic story there?
Well, the basic story is you have a loner enter the film, and it's Robert Mitchum, and he's riding on a horse, and he's riding in the rain, and he ends up making camp, and immediately there's a cattle stampede where his whole outfit and everything is just ruined. So he's by himself. He doesn't have anything. You don't know what this character is doing. And in my book on the movie, I wrote that Mitchum's entry was analogous to Raymond Chandler's famous line in the book Farewell, My Lovely, where the Philip Marlowe, who Mitchum played in another film, said that I needed a rest cure, I needed a vacation, I needed a home in the country, and what I had was a hat, a coat, and a gun. and that's pretty much how Mitchum enters the picture. And then he meets up with the drovers who had the cattle, and finds out that there's a bunch of contention going on, and where he's headed to the town of Sundust, where Tom Tully has had his cattle and he's been kicked off the reservation, and then there's an uprising of the homesteaders and so forth. And they're very suspicious of Mitchum, like, where are you going? Because apparently the homesteaders are being organized by a fellow named Robert Preston, played by Robert Preston. And do you know anybody? No. And then he said, well, work for me or drift. And then, as it turns out, that Mitchum is going there because Robert Preston's his friend. But he doesn't know what Robert Preston's up to, but he's down on his uppers and he needs a job. So you go through a series of character and plot points in Blood on the Moon where people are not necessarily, they don't appear to be what they initially are. And you deal with, in the plot, romantic betrayal, government corruption, shabby barrooms. A lot of the film was filmed at night, and a lot of the locations were shot in Sedona, Arizona, that I go into in my book, because they had to film it at the wrong time of the year, and they were getting chased all over that valley by rain and bad weather and so on and so forth. And it's quite an interesting backstory. But I think the key to the film is Robert Mitchum. Because he was now becoming very prominent. He had starred in one of the apocryphal film noirs the year before, a movie called Out of the Past. He had been nominated for his only Oscar for the story of G.I. Joe that Wild Bill Wellman put him in. And Mitchum was a true iconoclast and was perfect for the Jim Gary character in Blood on the Moon, because Mitchum himself was a wild boy of the road. His father got killed at a young age. His family situation was very, very impoverished and tough. He hit the road during the Depression, spent some time on a chain gang down south. And arrived in Los Angeles in 1937 on a freight train. And he hopped off the freight train, and there were a bunch of hobos around the fire, and he shared a joint of marijuana and a bottle of wine with them, and he wandered down to Long Beach, where his family had set up there. And from there went into acting. And his acting began in Westerns, in Hopalong Cassidy Westerns. He was working at night at Lockheed, and he had already had some kids. He'd married his high school sweetheart, so he was deferred from the draft, but he was turning into a zombie working in a factory at night. And he had done some acting and theater acting and so forth in Long Beach with his buddy Anthony Caruso. And he went, and the producer Pop Sherman, who was making all of these Hopalong Cassidy Westerns, he showed up and he took one look at him and said, "Don't shave, be in Kerrville 2 days from now." And that's how his career started. So he was really perfect for Blood on the Moon.
No shave and a rough look, and a career starts.
Exactly. And Mitchum was a really interesting fellow, because he was a autodidact, self-educated, a house full of books, wrote poetry, sang calypso, but he preferred hanging out at night with stunt people and getting drunk in bars. So he had the common touch. He had a real good BS meter for phonies, and one of the
That's
things
good to
I
have
get
in
into
Hollywood.
oh, absolutely. He was he was quite a guy. He was a marijuana smoker from a very young age, and right after Blood on the Moon wrapped, he got busted notoriously by the LA Vice Squad for pot. It was kind of a setup. And he had a characteristic sense of humor. When they took him down to book him, they asked him, "What's your occupation?" And he said, "Former actor." Because he thought his career was done. And what happened was, amazingly, and this is in the post-war environment, and this is when marijuana was viewed as a dangerous drug, and anyone that smoked pot was an addict or, disreputable, horrible person and so forth. And he thought that, well, this is the end of my career. But amazingly, the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes, who had bought RKO and turned it into a playground for his fantasies, he stood behind Mitchum, got him a good lawyer, hid him away in a house of a publicist so the press couldn't get him, launched this PR campaign. And Mitchum ended up, because they had him dead to rights, he pleaded guilty. And he ended up doing, I think, about 30 days at the county workhouse up in Castaic, at the top of the Grapevine by Bakersfield, where, ironically, he had been riding horses for Blood on the Moon and Robert Wise a couple months earlier, because part of the film was shot up in Castaic. And he did his time in jail. And when they interviewed him and said, well, Robert, how was jail? I mean, what did you get out of it? And he said, it was like Palm Springs without the riffraff.
Great answer.
So
he's a pretty funny guy.
Well, he was a very funny guy.
He needs to be your next book.
Oh, well, somebody's already written that book. A dear friend of mine who sadly died too soon, named Lee Server, wrote a fabulous biography of Mitchum called Baby, I Don't Care, which was a line from Out of the Past, a seminal line. And there have been other books about Mitchum and a lot of interviews, but that is, anyone who wants to know about Robert Mitchum, that is the book.
So as soon as the listeners read Blood on the Moon, then they have to go get Baby, I Don't Care, because they'll have been intrigued. I'm intrigued by Mitchum.
Go ahead. I'm
sorry. Was he in Young Billy Young? Do you remember?
I don't know. I'd have to
pretty sure
check
he was.
That, but he worked like a lot. And he worked right up to the time of, almost until he died. Yes, he was. He played Deputy Ben Kane and Robert Walker and my friend Angie Dickinson, who I adore, David Kelly, and so forth. So the answer is yes, he was in.
Yeah, because that was in part shot here at White Stallion, and I was certain it was the movie. I knew he'd done something here, and that was it.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I never got a chance to meet him. I did have friends. I knew Stu Whitman quite well, and I had him out to I have a film festival out in Palm Springs every May that actually will be celebrating our 25th anniversary of that Film Noir Festival. It's called the Arthur Lyons Film Noir Festival because Arthur started it, and when he passed away in 2008, I took it over. But I had Stu out there, and Stu used to live across the street from Mitchum up near Santa Barbara in Montecito. And at one point, Mitchum's drinking caught up with him, as it always does. And his family staged an intervention, and he went to Betty Ford. And he didn't do well there. He left early. I think that was when Elizabeth Taylor was there, and there was something about Mitchum taking a leak in the pool or something, and it didn't go over well.
If you haven't been to Ford, you haven't been to Hollywood, I think.
There you go. So, at any rate, Stu went over to a barbecue after that whole Betty Ford episode with Mitchum, and he was talking with Mitchum, and he said, "Bob, did you get anything out of Betty Ford? Did you learn anything? Was it helpful?" And Mitchum said to him, "Yeah, more ice."
Oh my gosh! Well, we're gonna take a break on that
Mitchum.
one. Yeah, we're gonna take a break.
Absolutely.
In 1904, cattle rancher Howard Eaton established a dude ranch in Wolf, Wyoming. Since those early years, dude ranching has become a mainstay of the travel industry. Thanks to the Dude Ranchers Association, formed in 1926, this special way of life, along with genuine Western hospitality, has been preserved. There are over 90 Dude Ranch Association members in the Western United States and Canada. There are destinations for every traveler, from solo travelers to multi-generational families, corporate events, weddings, other celebrations, and more. Looking to do some long trail rides, wrangle cattle, ride an ATV, whitewater raft, hike, birdwatch? The Dude Ranchers Association can help you find that perfect location to meet all your travel needs. After all, they've been doing it for almost 100 years and are pros. For more information, visit duderanch.org. That's duderanch.org. Your inner cowboy is just waiting to saddle up.
So, Alan, I kind of got the idea that Blood on the Moon is a kind of, at least in your opinion, a real neglected gem of a movie. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I wrote the book because I always liked the movie and no one had really written about it. And I think it has some unique attributes. In addition to Mitchum, you have a really wonderful cast in the movie, and you have some underrated actors. You have Walter Brennan, of all people, that's in it, who had already been in 100 movies.
I was going to say, he's been in a few.
Oh, yeah. And one story that the director, Robert Wise, liked to tell is the first time Mitchum walked on the set in his chaps and the hat and everything and greasy hair and stubble. Walter Brennan was there and he said, "Boy, God, that is the goddamnedest, realest cowboy I ever saw." But, you have Robert Preston, Walter Brennan, Phyllis Thaxter, a very underrated actor, Frank Phelan, Tom Tully, the great Charles McGraw in a bearskin coat chewing on a cigar. And of course, the director was Robert Wise, who would go on to be one of the great all-time great American directors, and who's, as he put it, he said, "I like many colors in my directorial palette." So he won Academy Awards for West Side Story. He directed The Sound of Music. He directed Odds Against Tomorrow, which is a really great crime film produced and starring Harry Belafonte and Robert Ryan. The Day the Earth Stood Still. And Wise started out on the loading dock at RKO kicking film cans around.
Wow.
And worked his way up into the sound department. One of his first jobs was dubbing in the beeps from the old RKO radio tower that opened the beginning of RKO's pictures. And he became an editor. He edited the 1939 Hunchback of Notre Dame. He edited Citizen Kane for Orson Welles and was nominated for an Oscar. But he itched to direct, and he finally got his chance with some of the really great Val Lewton horror films that RKO produced during the World War II years. And this was Blood on the Moon was his first A picture. where he had a big budget, a major star. He was managing the location, which had that I go into, had a whole lot of problems with weather and logistics. He shot in different studios, RKO, and then he shot at what was known as the RKO Ranch, which was about 80 acres in the center of Encino.
Right.
That was sold off, and they had the western town of Sundust there and so forth. And I used to drive by there when I still had a day job, and I drive by that every day. And it's now a park and a golf course and a park. And I drive by and say, hey, I'm driving right by where Bedford Falls was shot, and It's a Wonderful Life, and Paris and the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And now it's a soccer field. But it's really, the film really has some attributes, and I was really pleased that to discover, I turned on Turner Classic Movies, and I do a lot of work for TCM, and a lot of the people there are very close to my heart. And there's Martin Scorsese introducing Blood on the Moon, saying that it influenced him in his latest picture that has come out based on a true story, and that when he saw it as a kid, it made a very deep impression on him.
Well, that's
so if Martin Scorsese shares the same appreciation for Blood on the Moon, I think both the movie and myself are in good company.
Yeah, no kidding. Talk a little bit about the costuming. The costuming was one of the major parts of the picture, and it was done by Joe DeYoung. And Joe DeYoung was a Western historian, and he knew Western garb, the real thing. And in fact, he worked on a number of other pictures. He worked on DeMille, and he also worked for George Stevens, and he did all the wardrobe sketching and outfitting for Shane. And Robert Wise, who did a commentary track on Blood on the Moon when it was done on Laserdisc back in the 90s, and I was able to get a hold of a copy of that, praised him to the skies. And the other thing I did as part of the research for the book is I got a hold of Wise's shooting script, which is at the Cinema Library with his papers at USC. And every page he wrote down in every scene what the wardrobe would be for each scene. And I think one of the things on Blood of the Moon is really striking is the realism of all of that. The way that the people looked, the cowboys and the gunslingers in the 1880s, which is about the time when this film was set, it really looks authentic. It really looks authentic. And even if you're not familiar with what's authentic, it still looks authentic. You know, it's interesting. You said, of course, it was a direct example of the quote that, you know, film noir starts with the main character getting screwed and it goes downhill, and it starts with a stampede. And it's interesting because stampedes, we've had 31 films shot here, and I think 3 of them have stampedes in them. And as a person who's kind of worked around cattle a bit, I thought that these massive stampedes were a bit exaggerated in their place in the movie. But yet, a great book, A Log of the Cowboy, that was written sort of early 1900s about a young man's time in the turn of the century driving cattle from Texas to Montana, and they had multiple stampedes, and that was one of their greatest fears. So at least in that book, and it was a nonfiction, you know, it was his log of his experience of making that giant drive. Stampedes were very real and big problems. So it's kind of interesting. So that part of the movie's a lot more real than I would have ever guessed.
Yeah, and they actually filmed the cattle stampede, and they did that up in Castaic, because Castaic at that time was you know, like the real wilderness. There was really nothing up there, and you had cattle ranches up there, and they filmed the stampede. And the perspective on a lot of that, they had to do a lot of doubling of stuff and cutting things together in the film. For example,
Yeah, it shows. Go
there's
ahead,
there's a long there's a long sequence of Mitchum going over the mountains to the Indian reservation, and McGraw and Preston are after him and so forth. And even though it's very skillful, they had a crew go up with doubles through the mountains in Colorado on the snow and everything. But then when they have the close-ups of the characters, they're on a set. They're on a set, and it's well cut together, but you can still notice this. And the film cost, I think, all up, the negative cost of the film was like $1.2 million or something like that, which was a very robust budgeted movie in 1947 and 1948.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that, but boy, that sounds like a ton of
Yeah.
money in 47. Would that have been one of the more expensive films in that era?
It was. I don't think it was totally expensive if you compared it to some of the other stuff that was coming from MGM and so forth. But it was very expensive for RKO, and in fact, Wise went over budget by about $200,000, which is a large amount of money. But I kind of temper that with the fact that I don't think the people that made budgets for the studios were the people who made the films.
Right.
So a budget is kind of like how much will stick to the wall when we throw it there, and this will make the bosses happy. So there's certainly some of that. But on the other hand, Wise had to manage, like I had mentioned, his struggles with he and Musaraka out there in Sedona in the valley. And what would happen is they would go for a setup in a certain part of the valley, and it would be raining and overcast. And so they would go move someplace else. And then they even took the producer, a guy named Theron Worth, who was a colleague of Wise's in the editing department, and they sent him out shooting second unit stuff, or they would rehearse at the hotel and all this other stuff. They even had Mitchum go judge a kind of a beauty contest at a local college in Flagstaff. And I made the comment in the book, fortunately, Mitchum's wife showed up about a week into the shoot, so he couldn't explore the co-ed scene at the college.
Well, that's
degree
so. This was Wise's
degree of depth.
Yeah. So this was Wise's
his
first big budget
first
movie.
Major eight.
Sorry.
Exactly. And what happened is when Howard Hughes took over RKO and turned it into this plaything of, first thing he did was he got rid of Barbara Bel Geddes because she didn't have breasts like Jane Russell. And Dory Sherry was the head of production that greenlighted this movie, Blood on the Moon, for Wise. And made some very serious movies and good movies. And as soon as Hughes took over and all of this nonsense started, Hughes wouldn't even have an office on his own studio. He had a place on the Goldwyn lot, and he had all the scripts brought over in a station wagon. He was going to approve and micromanage everything. So Dory Sherry thought, it's time for me to get out. But then Hughes set up a meeting for him, and he was in, I think, Cary Grant's house in Malibu, and Hughes was staying there. And Dory Sherry shows up, and he said Hughes entered through a door from which there was a woman in there hooking up a bra, and came out and told him, nothing's going to change, everything's going to be fine, and so on and so forth. And then right after that, he made him fire Bel Geddes. And then Sherry had been nurturing a personal project of a film that turned out to be Battleground. And Hughes said, no, we don't want to make anything about World War II. It has to be about communists. So Sherry just said, I'm done with this. He left. MGM subsequently hired him to be head of production at MGM, and he took Battleground over there, had Bill Wellman direct it. And it made a ton of money and won a bunch of Academy Awards.
So did Blood on the Moon make money?
Yeah, Blood on the Moon did make money, because really what happened, and this I'm backtracking to the whole pot bus thing with Mitchum. Mitchum was such a likable, appearing, roguish persona on screen. People, including especially women, really liked him. And so amazingly, instead of this pot bust turning into a big scandal, it actually enhanced his popularity.
There's a whole different set of rules for celebrities. It's always been that way, hasn't it?
There are. And I think a lot of this had to do with the public. Even though marijuana was viewed totally different, there were a lot of sympathetic articles saying that he might have been a drug addict. And then they brought his wife and kids and publicity and all that other stuff. But I think people, after going through World War II and women working and serving and men being over there and exposed to the things that real war brings, they weren't intended to be as judgmental over someone smoking a joint as they might have been in 1939.
Yeah, they like their bad boy celebrities.
Absolutely.
What are some of your favorite films, particularly in the film noir?
Oh gosh, that's like saying which one of my granddaughters do I like the most?
Well, we won't ask that, but we will ask this.
But some of the classic ones like Out of the Past, Double Indemnity, the Maltese Falcon. Every time the Maltese Falcon comes on, if I happen to be changing the channel and that movie's on, I'll just stay there and watch it. And really, half of the Maltese Falcon, or a third of it, is 5 characters sitting on a set talking. But the talk is so good, and you have Bogart and Elijah Cook and Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre and Mary Astor, and that great dialogue. I mean, you can't beat that. And some of the other pictures, I wrote a very big, long biography of Michael Curtiz, and I thought he was one of the most underrated directors, and some of his films, non-noir, like The Adventures of Robin Hood, Casablanca is probably one of my favorite movies. And there's another movie he made in 1950, which is the definitive version of Hemingway's To Have and to Have Not, called The Breaking Point, starring the great John Garfield and Patricia Neal. It is just a superb movie. So there's a lot of movies.
How about a modern one or two?
A modern one or two? Well, modern for me is like,
be careful here.
Yeah, be careful. I mean, modern for me, Chinatown, Miller's Crossing, which is 1990. Movies like that. There's movies that I've seen, British mystery shows and some of the streaming stuff that's very good. But you have to kind of hunt for stuff now.
How about some of Clint Eastwood's later westerns?
Clint Eastwood,
would they fit that?
Yeah, I like Clint Eastwood's. I certainly liked Unforgiven, which I thought was a terrific movie. And boy, Gene Hackman, what a great actor. And I'm glad to know he's still with us at 93, living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And another Eastwood movie I always liked was The Outlaw Josie Wales.
Yeah,
because it told that whole story of Bleeding Kansas and the Red Legs and Quantrill and all of that, and wrapped it into a fictional story. And then you roll into the Comancheros and all of that. And the topper for Josie Wales is I was really good friends with a stuntman actor named Bobby Hoy.
Bobby Hoy was here. I knew Bobby Hoy.
Oh, I knew Bobby. Bobby and I
used to go
to the movies together. Yeah, Bobby and I became good buddies near the end of his life, and I wrote the book on Charles McGraw, and Bobby for a time was like Charlie McGraw's little brother.
He was in High Chaparral here at White Stallion.
Oh yeah, he was in the High Chaparral. That was his show.
He was friends with my
Bobby
dad
really well.
Yeah,
super guy.
So you've interviewed a lot of celebrities. And we're running out of time, but this is so good. We're going to just keep the clock running if you don't mind.
Of course.
Give us, and you mentioned Angie Dickinson is a great friend, but
Oh,
Give us
love Angie. She's the best.
And how old is she?
Angie's, I think, 92 now.
Oh,
she's
wow. That ages all of us to hear that.
Yeah, trust me. I'm getting on myself, and it's kind of like I turn around and I see, athletes and actors I grew up with, and they're either passing on or, my God, this guy's 90. I remember him when his hair was black and so forth. But some of the celebrities, I mean, I had Ernest Borgnine. I spent a day and a night with him, and absolutely nicest, funniest, down to earth. I had him come out for one of his movies that has been forgotten called Pay or Die, where he plays a real life Italian police official in New York who's cleaning up the Black Hand, a guy by the name of Joseph Petrosino, who is a real person. So it's kind of a docu-noir type of thing. And he loved the movie because it was made in 1960 and he was the star and his name was above the title and so forth. And he came out and he was just wonderful. We sat around for a lunch for 5 hours with Borgnine and his friend who was in the Wild Bunch, who I'm having a senior moment. His name escapes me. He was the guy in the beginning of the Wild Bunch marching all those people around the bank, singing and so on and so forth. And so both of them came out, and I had John Garfield's daughter, Julie, who's a friend of mine, and some other people. And we sat around the Hilton in Palm Springs for a 5-hour lunch, and everyone taking turn telling stories. And it was great.
Those are good times.
And Borgnine was a World War II vet, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I called his publicist, and he said, I think Ernie may do this. Let me get back to you. About a half hour later, my phone rings. Hey, Alan, it's Ernie. I heard you were a swabby, too. I was a gunner's mate. And it was just like we were in a bar ordering a shot and a beer. Great guy. Another person that I did several events with was Norman Lloyd, who was an actor, director, whose career went back to doing Orson Welles' production of Julius Caesar on Broadway in the early 1930s. And then Orson brought Norman to Hollywood when Orson was going to originally make Heart of Darkness, and he ended up going back home, and then Hitchcock brought him back, and Norman had the title role in Saboteur. He was the one that fell off the Statue of Liberty. But Norman worked with Charlie Chaplin. He produced Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He knew everybody. He worked with everyone. And having lunch with Norman was like listening to an oral history of the history of Hollywood. He was just a great raconteur, a wonderful person. Another person I was dear friends with was Marcia Hunt. And Marcia lived to be 104 and Norman lived to be 106.
Wow.
So they were around a long time. And Marcia, very good friends. My wife and I were very good friends with Marcia. And she was one of the more amazing people I've ever met because she was interested in everything current. When she got blacklisted, she went to work for the UN. She was the unofficial mayor of Sherman Oaks. She started a program to help the homeless when that word entered our lexicon, first entered our lexicon here in Los Angeles, and was just involved in all this contemporary stuff. She wrote music, she sang, she did all kinds of things. And, I'd go into her house and there'd be a picture of Marcia standing with Robert Taylor, Mitzi Green, and Eleanor Roosevelt on the steps of the White House.
Wow.
Or I'd tinkle with her piano and she'd say, a friend of mine, she was married to a screenwriter named Bob Presnell, who died in the 90s. And he said, a friend of Bob's, it was a composer, used to use that piano when he was here composing music, blah, 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 blah. And I said, really? He says, yeah, it was Leonard, and I said, Leonard Bernstein? She said, oh, yeah.
That's him.
And she
That's
said,
the one.
That's him. Yeah, that's the one. And she said, the music went da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. da 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 da. And I went, that's the theme from On the Waterfront. She goes, yeah, that's it. He was working on composing that.
Oh,
and I go,
God.
Marcia, I'm not washing my hands. I've touched the same keys as Leonard Bernstein.
Wow.
But she was amazing, and I wrote her funeral program. I miss her. My other buddy was a character actor named Richard Erdman, Dick Erdman, who was the barracks chief in Stalag 17. Michael Curtiz assigned him out of high school for a cold audition and put him in a movie called Janie, and he was at Warner Brothers for 7 years and had like a 70-year career.
Wow.
And I was actually one of his executors of his estate, because sadly his daughter and his wife predeceased him, and he made it to 93. But
I want to hang around you. Your friends are long-lived. We've got a.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's good. I hope it carries over to me.
Yeah, and we have.
But I've had great experiences with so many people, particularly out in Palm Springs, and also the Noir City Festival in Hollywood that Eddie Muller and I co-program and co-produce, and we're returning to the Egyptian Theater, the newly remodeled and refurbished Egyptian Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, March 22nd through the 29th, and we are celebrating, I think, the 26th year of that festival at the Egyptian Theater.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you about it, and also, we've talked a lot about Blood on the Moon, and that's terrific. But you've got some other books, and you've got a lot going on. Is there a good place for people to? The books I'm sure are available wherever. The books are on Amazon and wherever. But if you go to my website, AlanKrode.com, or just Google me, you'll find out more than you ever needed to know about me. And the website has my books, and I've done commentaries and documentaries on going on 50 different movies of DVDs and Blu-rays and all of that other stuff. And the Film Noir Foundation, that we have rescued films that have fallen into the cracks, that have either been ignored or discarded. We've actually used the funding from our festival and our merchandise and our books and stuff to restore films, and we've restored upwards of 15 to 20 films, and we've put a lot of these films out on Blu-ray via our partners at Flickr Alley, and those are available on the internet or via the Film Noir Foundation website. That's terrific.
If
you find a son of his...
It's keeping me young.
Yeah, I'll bet. Alan, A-L-A-N-K, Rode, R-O-D-E, altogether.com, right?
That's it.
And
that is it.
We are going to have you back if you'll grace us again. It's really been great.
Absolutely. And I hope I can make it back out to the Tucson Book Festival.
Well,
I'm working on another book now on the movie Shane.
Oh yeah. That's
so
good to know.
I have in my closet, I have a Stetson and a fedora.
Well, we'll get you out here and wear them both.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Sounds great. Hey, really enjoyed talking with you guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
Huge fun. You know, Alan, I was up at Circle Bar Ranch this past summer, and Bob Foster, our manager, said, "Hey, Russell, come over here and shake hands with our horseshoer." And I said, "Oh, okay." Being a horseshoer myself, I was anxious to go say hi. And then he said, "This is Deb Greeno." And I just stopped. It's not a common name, and it's rodeo royalty. Deb Greeno is our horseshoer. 13 years consecutively qualifying for the NFR, National Finals Rodeo, and world champion bareback bronc rider in 91. And when I got a chance, got him aside and found out he was quite the storyteller and a whole lot of fun, and everything his press releases have ever said about him. But he didn't know about Golden Wings horseshoes, and we've got to introduce him to those in a real way, because number one, horseshoeing, as Alan says, is one of the hardest jobs ever, and Golden Wings makes it easier. And more importantly than that, it makes horses' lives better. And it, as I've said many times, Golden Wings horseshoes get some of our horses back on the trail and living a better and happier life. And it's good for us, but it's also very good for them. And of course, our great friend and listener, Barb, she's winning buckles on her horse thanks to Golden Wings horseshoes. So goldenwingshorseshoes.com is the place to go and get these revolutionary plastic horseshoes, the first that I've ever seen that work. You know, Alan, we went way long today, and I was having a lot of fun. I think you were too, and it just seems to be one more example of the power that Hollywood, movies, now streaming, etc., has on our lives. I think one of the most interesting things to our guests about our ranch history here is the 31 films, 200 TV productions. And it just has that incredible grasp on people.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. Hats off to Stan Houston and his production team. You can find Blood on the Moon on Prime Video. A special thank you to singer Cynthia Keefe, the featured vocalist in the Bob Kramer Band's rendition of Bad Moon Rising. We'll feature more of her work in upcoming episodes. Tune in next week when the Cowboys chat with Western musical talent Greg Hager. Until then, this is Lynn Weezy Sneed reminding you to sit tall and ride safe.
trouble on the way. I see earthquakes and lightning. I see bad times today. Don't go around tonight, it's bound to take your life. There's a bad moon on the rise. I hear hurricanes blowing. I know the end is coming soon. I feel rivers overflowing. Hope you have got your things together. Hope you are quite prepared to die. Looks like we're in for nasty weather. One eye is taking